All right, so we will get started. So I am Jessie Pollard, as Brittany said, and I am a utility arborist for Georgia Power Company. So been with Georgia Power Company since 2018 full time. I was fortunate to do an internship rotation with them before that. But yes, full time since 2018 in the Metro Atlanta area. So essentially I oversee all of the vegetation maintenance on the east side of Atlanta. So, that includes tree pruning, herbicide application, lots of stuff that go in with that. But that's just a little bit about me. I graduated from the University of Georgia in 2017, proud dogs fan, certified arborist, utility specialist with ISA, track, all of that great stuff. So today I'm just kind of going to give you guys, best I can, a high level overview of what utility arboriculture is, why we do it, who does it, when we do it, and just a little bit about that. We're going to touch on basics of utilities. We're going to touch on the High Voltage Safety Act. We're going to touch on types of work that we do, and then also some frequently asked questions that we get as utility arborists that may have popped into your head, or you may have gotten them yourself if you're a private arborist or consultant. So kind of want to start off the presentation by going through what is arboriculture. So I'm sure that most people on this call know what arboriculture is, or at least are familiar with it. So Merriam-Webster defines it as the cultivation of trees and shrubs, especially for ornamental purposes. But obviously we know that there are more purposes for arboriculture than just ornamental. And obviously that's what we're going to talk about today, is just one of those sectors of it. So if we know what arboriculture is, what is utility arboriculture? So we'll define that as arboriculture that addresses vegetation around high voltage power lines, phone lines, and other utility installations. So today I'm going to be talking specifically about utility arboriculture as it pertains to high voltage power lines, but really this pertains to, AT&T, phone internet lines, whatever it is, in the region that you live in. All of that is considered utility vegetation management or utility arboriculture. And I kind of want to start off with just some basics. So I want to go over voltages and just do a little comparison for, those of us who are not familiar with the utility industry, those of us that are, and just kind of, like to see the comparison. I know that this is kind of eye-opening for me as someone who works in the industry, even to look at this comparison. So you look at your household outlet, that's going to run about 110 to 220 volts on average. If you've ever stuck your finger near a light socket or an outlet that's uncovered, or a light socket that's uncovered, it'll give you a little shock. It can be very dangerous, but most of the time just going to give you a little shock wherever you happen to touch that. So we'll step it up to distribution power lines. So those are the ones that you're going to see running down the streets in the cities and maybe in your neighborhood, going to be on the little bit shorter poles. Those are going to run anywhere from 12,000 to 25,000 volts. So contact with one of those, not going to deliver a small shock. That's going to really pack a punch. So if you make contact with one of those, it's going to be fatal. So that's definitely not something that we want to be in contact with. Then if you step it up again to our transmission lines, these are the ones that you see on the very, very tall towers. A lot of times it looks like a big corridor, it's walled off on both sides. Big towers, these are going to run about 46,000 to 500,000 volts. So these are the lines that actually carry the electricity from the plants where they're generated to the substations, where they are then stepped down to the distribution lines, which are going to carry that electricity through cities and neighborhoods. Then they'll be stepped down again to actually enter your home or your business. So that's kind of just a little basic rundown on voltages so that we can sort of dip our toe into utility. So another thing that's important to think of when we're going to start talking about, power lines and trees and how they interact with each other. So the power grid is improving every single year. So technology is getting better, better funding towards that technological improvement. However, the method of power delivery on average just remains the same mostly. So we get a lot of questions. hey, why is this power line not buried? Or hey, can you guys bury this power line? Can you convert it underground? Really, this overhead structure is the best way to deliver electricity for a couple of reasons. So burying power lines is extremely expensive and extremely time consuming. It can also be very invasive. I mean, obviously you look at these overhead lines and you think, well, these are invasive too, but when you start digging on people's properties and, having to go through that process can also be very invasive too. Another thing is, while putting a power line underground kind of eliminates the tree conflict, if there is an outage on an underground line, it takes the line crews a lot longer to find that outage. So when you have an outage on an overhead line, it can be pretty easy, especially if it's a tree that's fallen or something like that. They can see that, obviously, just look at it, determine what it is right there, and fix it pretty quickly. So those are a couple of things. And while we are moving kind of in a direction where the grid's improving, this is going to be the way that power is delivered, probably for the foreseeable future. So why do utilities prune trees? This is something that you kind of have to think about before you even get started on talking about this topic. So the number one and number two reasons are safety of the public and reliable electricity. So this picture on the right is actually taken from a video that has circled around, I think, Facebook and the internet. It's actually a tree that has made contact with the power line. And you can see, it's smoking. It's created this, what we'd call an arc flash on the top, where it's kind of flashed up the electricity. And then you've got the fire down that goes down into the tree. So that tree has become energized. So we've got a couple of issues there. So the first issue is we've got a fire hazard, and anyone that comes near that tree obviously is at risk of being burned. Second of all, that tree is energized. So anyone that contacts that tree or even is near that tree has the risk of getting electrocuted or electric shock. And then second of all, this is going to cause a power outage, obviously. So this tree and this power line cannot coexist in the way that they are. So as soon as that tree makes contact and this event occurs, the power is going to go out immediately after all of this fire and electricity and arcing. So that's a good picture of why it's important to keep the trees out of the power lines. So I'm going to break those up into two. I'm going to break them up into reliability, and then I'm going to talk about safety. So as a company, Georgia Power views it as important to support better and more reliable electricity. So by doing this preventative maintenance, we're able to kind of prevent those trees from going into the power lines. At least that is the hope. I'll go ahead and pause, Brittany, for a question.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. I can read it. John wants to know, and you may not actually be able to answer this right this second, but you have estimates for cost differences of overhead versus underground construction, like cost per mile, overhead versus underground fault, interruption per repair. Do you guys have those KPIs?
Potentially. I don't personally have them, and unfortunately not privy to that information just because I'm not an engineer and I don't directly deal with those projects. But I would definitely think there's probably some information out there. I don't know if Georgia Power specifically has any information, but that's something I can look into, and my contact information will be provided at the end too, so we can kind of have some back and forth if y'all have some more specific questions like that, but not sure exactly on an exact cost difference for both of those. But great question.
Yeah, very good question. All right, thank you so much, Jessie. I'll let you continue on.
Definitely. So like I said, reliability is one of the main things that we look at when we're determining why we're doing pruning around power lines. So how can we do that? So Georgia Power utilizes contracted tree crews to do some of this work for us, this preventative maintenance. So our power lines are on schedule. So because of that, we have tree crews that go through entire circuits and prune trees away from the power lines. And we do this on distribution, which is the lines that run down the street through your neighborhood in the city. And we also do it on our larger transmission corridors as well. So this is what's really important, because if these trees are allowed to grow into the power lines and make contact, then we're back to where we were on that photo on the previous slide, where you've got, contact with the line, you may have a fire, you may have an electrical hazard, and, you have a power outage. So this is really the basics of why it's so important to make sure that these trees are not coming into contact with the lines. So you may have seen some of these crews doing work. You know, we have a few different types of crews. We've got these bucket trucks that do a lot of our work for us. We've got big, what we call giraffes, or machines that you may see running down the road. They have long arms with a saw on the end. We'll do maintenance with those. We do some helicopter pruning. So we do aerial vegetation maintenance. So you may see a helicopter with a long saw that's kind of hanging below it that we will do on some of our more mountainous terrain or more rural areas. And then we also have climbing crews who actually climb the trees for some of our rights of way that run behind people's homes or in inaccessible areas. So those are a few, you know, types of crews that we use to go in and do this preventative maintenance for us, do this pruning back. And then we also have reactive work. So obviously, you know, we're not going to catch everything before it becomes an issue. I mean, we are dealing with trees here. So, you know, ever changing, ever growing, you know, Mother Nature is sometimes not kind to us. So may cause trees to uproot or may cause trees to break off, some of those circumstances. So we do a lot of tree assessment. So, you know, we'll assess a tree, hopefully catch a lot of hazardous trees before they become an issue, but not always. So this picture on the left, you can see we're utilizing a crane to remove a tree that had fallen, actually made contact with one of our lines. And then on the right-hand side, you can see that we've got a tree that's uprooted on one of our transmission rights of way that's, you know, potentially a hazard to the line. If it comes on over, it could catch one of those lines on the inside. So we'll send crews out after identifying these hazards and try to catch them. So we do rely on our customers a lot for stuff like this as well, specifically in our more metro and residential areas. So, you know, customers report trees, hey, this tree looks kind of funny, or hey, this tree is falling, or, you know, can you come look at it? And we will always send someone out to take a look at it and just kind of assess that tree and see if it's something that we do need to address. Sometimes it's not, sometimes it's a great catch. So we do have a lot of reactive work in this business as well. And so next I'm going to hit a little bit on safety. So, you know, safety has a lot of facets to it. And one of our main things is we want safety of our employees at Georgia Power. And we also want safety of the public because that's who we serve. So how can we ensure public safety through what we do? And how can we communicate to the public the potential risks and hazards associated with power lines? So something to think about is one wire on a distribution line can carry 7,200 volts of electricity. So if you're looking at a power line, say there's 3 lines up there at the very top. If you just touch one of those, you're potentially getting 7,200 volts of electricity. That can kill you instantly, and probably will if you make contact with it. So a couple of things that we recommend: don't climb trees that are near power lines. So we know that the human body is a great conductor of electricity, just like wood is. So that electricity, if you come into contact with the line, or if you even come into contact with a tree that is near or contacting the line, that electricity is going to try to find the nearest ground. So that may be through your body, and definitely do not want that. Also, don't try to trim trees that are near the power line. So we'll talk a little bit later about, you know, kind of how to go through that process if you do have to do work on a tree that's near a power line and you're not incidental line clearance certified. But just best practice, if it looks like it's close to the power line, just leave it alone and reach out and go through the proper process. If you see a power line that's on the ground, assume that that power line is energized. It may not be, but always assume that it's energized, because we have had lines go on the ground that stay live and stay energized and have to be manually shut off. It doesn't always end up where the tree falls on the line or the line falls on the ground and the power goes out. So very high hazard there. Stay completely away from that power line and the tree or whatever's involved in it, a tree, a car, whatever it may be. Keep your children, keep your pets away from it, and call 911. And again, don't touch anything. So don't walk up to it, try to move limbs out of the way. If someone's in their car trapped under the tree, you know, do not run up to the car and try to get them out of that car as badly as you may want to try to help. You know, you may make yourself a victim, and that'll just make the situation worse. So a couple of tips there on, you know, what to do if you see a downed line. That's our question.
Jesse, so John wants to know, does Georgia have minimum line clearance distance regulations for vegetation to be clear from overhead electric lines?
We do. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that when I talk about the High Voltage Safety Act. I will say that our contracted tree crews that work and are contracted with Georgia Power, their minimum approach distance is 31 inches. So no part of their body, no part of their truck can be within 31 inches from an energized line. That is different for private companies who are wanting to work around power lines. And I'll kind of get into that detail as well, but just kind of quickly, it's 10 feet. So if you are working on a tree, wanting to do work on a tree, you're looking for that tree to be at least 10 feet from that line. And that is all tree parts. So not just the trunk. If it's got a twig within that 10 feet, you're not going to be able to do any work on that tree without coming through the utility first, whatever utility that may be, Georgia Power in this instance, and kind of working with Georgia Power to make that situation safe.
Okay, awesome. Well, if you have any more questions on that, John, later, just let us know. Thanks, Jesse.
Yep. Okay, so here we are. So going to talk a little bit about the High Voltage Safety Act and the 811 process, which is another way that Georgia Power can ensure kind of public safety and safety of our peers who do tree work around power lines. So I know one misconception that I had when I first started and heard, Georgia 811, I'm thinking, oh, well, that's the call before you dig people. What do they have to do with, pruning around power lines? But it's actually required by Georgia law before doing any work around overhead power lines, that any private work around overhead power lines, that you go through this 811 process. So what does 811 do for you? So a little bit of background behind 811 and behind the High Voltage Safety Act. So the High Voltage Safety Act requires that anyone doing work that may come within 10 feet of an overhead high voltage electric line, so that's 750 volts and above, must notify Georgia 811 at least 72 hours in advance of such work. Then Georgia 811 will notify the utilities so that safety measures can be put into place. And why is this important? So say you've got a private tree company that's doing a tree removal for a customer, and they do not go through the 811 process, and they begin removing this tree kind of unaware of their proximity to the power lines, and they cut a branch off and it falls across the power lines and causes a power outage to 2,000 customers. So this is a real life situation, something that's happened recently, and it's happened several times. So you've got an outage to 2,000 customers. So then you've got a response from Georgia Power that's needed. Go out there. It's actually possible that that private company can receive a fine for either damage to equipment or manpower needed to restore that outage. That's obviously something that we want to prevent for that company and for Georgia Power. We don't want any surprise outages, obviously. Also, what a huge safety hazard. If you're unaware of where you're working, you think that you're clear, you're holding a limb, you go to drop it, that limb makes contact with the power line and you're holding it. What's going to happen? Really, really bad. So those are some things that prevents. So when you go through the Georgia 811 process, it's not something designed to say, oh, well, we just want to make this as hard for you as possible. We just want to know everything that you're doing. It's really to prevent someone from getting injured, someone from getting killed, damage, unplanned outages. That's really the purpose behind 811. So what is the utility's responsibility? So you're the company or you're the customer and you've called in to Georgia 811 and you've created your ticket with them. Now what? How long is it going to be? Who's going to call me back? That's what you're wondering. So after the utility is notified about the work by 811, so at Georgia Power, it comes in as a ticket. So a ticket is generated by 811, goes to our engineering department for the correct engineer for your area to respond to. Then it's the utility's responsibility to make contact with the person who put in that request in a timely manner. Then the utility must arrange for safeguards to be put into place. So this involves, coordinating with work schedules and then determining costs and payment for whatever is needed to make that job safe. So using a Georgia Power example, a lot of times what will happen is an 811 ticket is generated. It's sent to our engineering department. That engineer will reach out to whoever made the ticket. So whether that's, a private tree company or whether that's the customer, will reach out to them, oftentimes meet them on site to look at the job, go through it, talk about what's going to be best to make that location safe, and then kind of move forward with really, paperwork, planning, scheduling, all of that. And no work can start until the utility has formulated a plan to guard against whatever danger may be there by either de-energizing or grounding the line or relocating the line. And I will say that in the Georgia 811 standards, it does mention a third option of covering the line, but Georgia Power does not view that as a legitimate barrier between that crew and the energized power line anymore. So really, your main option, probably 9 times out of 10, is going to be de-energizing or grounding that line. So completely shutting the power off so that that job can be done safely.
Awesome. Jesse, I do have one question. Is tree pruning, is tree pruning and clearing restricted to trees and limbs within rights of way and easements? What are the risk evaluation criteria for trees and snags or limbs located outside of the clearing zone, but with a threat potential before deciding to remove?
Yeah, that's a great question. So yeah, we get a lot of requests to come look at stuff that we may come out to, and we would consider it in this circumstance that this person's describing off right of way. So at that point, Georgia Power, technically is operating outside of their rights if we go too far outside of our right of way. However, and I will say there's a lot of it depends in this industry as well. But in our experience, if that tree is an imminent threat, so it is going to fall no matter what, it's in the process of falling and it will take out that line, we do have the ability to remove that. Like I said, we get a lot of requests to come and look at stuff. We're not obligated to remove anything either within the right of way or outside of the right of way if we don't deem it necessary to be removed or don't deem it an imminent threat. But yes, we do operate kind of outside of that easement if necessary to prevent, detrimental, hazard to the line.
Okay. Thank you, Jesse.
Yeah. Okay, so I talked a little bit about cost. So there is a cost involved if you are going to have a mitigation to removing a tree that's near a power line. So what determines the cost? So a few things. So the voltage of the line is going to determine the cost. So, we have a single phase, which feeds less customers, and then you have multi-phase, which is going to carry, deliver more electricity and it's going to feed more customers. So if you've got an outage on a multi-phase line, you're going to have more customers without power while you're removing that tree. Single phase line, obviously less customers out of power. It's also going to depend on the nearest protective device. So when you go to make a plan to de-energize that line, you're looking for the nearest device that you can de-energize to kind of isolate that outage. So if your nearest protective device is pretty far from where you're working, you're going to have more customers without power while that work's being done. Whereas if you've got a protective device that's, pretty close to where you're removing the tree, you may just have 2 customers out of power, you as the person who wants the tree removed and your neighbor. So it kind of depends on that. It depends on the manpower needed. So it depends on, line crew resources, how many of them are needed, what work is involved, how long it takes, the number of grounds that you need. So it's going to depend on the number of places that you've got to actually hang protective grounds for that private tree crew that shows them, hey, this is de-energized. And then you've got the involvement level of our control center. So if it's a very large outage, they may have to do a lot of, back and forth and, configuration with them, which may also increase the price a bit. And I will say that I am not involved in that process at Georgia Power. Obviously know what the process is. I don't determine any cost. I don't really go through that process. I just kind of know how it works. Just a heads up to anyone. So another thing, that we're starting to see is, what if my company is incidental line clearance certified? So what that means is that you have been approved and you've been trained and certified to work within 10 feet of a power line, and you're not a Georgia Power contractor doing Georgia Power related line clearing. So I'll simplify that a little bit. So say you've got a private company, you've gotten your incidental line clearance certification. That means that you can do private jobs and you can get within 10 feet of the line, but you must still go through the 811 process, communicate with Georgia Power that you will be working within that 10 feet, show them that you're line clearance certified, and go through that process. I have seen many, many times that incidental line clearance certified companies will go out to do a job without notifying Georgia Power, without going through the 811 process, and their job is stopped in the middle because there is no proof of that job. There is no documentation that the 811 process was followed. So yes, the line clearance certification is great. It allows you as a private company to probably do more jobs and not have to have as many de-energized lines, but you do still have to go through the process. So simplified, here is my little flow chart of how the 811 process goes. So again, you call 811 as the company removing the tree or as the customer. 811 notifies the utility. The utility contacts the person making the request. The utility approves or denies the work and arranges for it to be completed safely. Cost is generated based on circumstances of work, and then the work is completed. So now that we have kind of gone through that intro, I wanted to go through some frequently asked questions that we get as utility arborists, and maybe that you get if you are not a utility arborist. Maybe you're a private arborist or consulting arborist, or you just have questions about, what is this work? Why do you do it? Who does it? When do you do it? How do you do it? So I just wanted to go through a lot of questions that we get asked on a regular basis and hope that this brings some clarity to some of those questions that you may have or that you may have gotten. So how often is utility tree pruning done? Well, that depends. So it's going to depend on the utility. So I will tell you that Georgia Power's distribution arborist, we prune on a 3-year cycle. So that means that theoretically, if you live in a neighborhood and you have a power line running down your street, you will probably see us every 3 years. That's what we strive for. We have some parts of some regions of the state that we do every 2 years. We have some that we maybe do every 4 years if we're able to get more clearance, or, the trees are not as close to the lines. I will tell you that in Atlanta, we have a lot of trees and they're very close to the lines. So 3 years is about as far as we can make it without needing to come back through and get those trees back off of those lines. It also depends on the climate. So, we joke here in the South that we've got, a 9-month growing season or a 10-month growing season. So, our trees grow into, October a lot of times. And so that depends a lot, or that contributes a lot to that cycle of when that pruning is done. I imagine as you get into even warmer climates, that maybe even increases. Going to depend on funding. So, a lot of times, if the economy is not doing great, or, we're in a tight year, funding may change that. That may change the dynamic of how we have to schedule things or the way that we do our work. It depends on the clearance from the last time that we were there. So if we didn't get as much clearance, you may see us coming back more frequently. It depends on regulatory enforcement. So on our big transmission lines, those are federally regulated as they get up to certain voltages. So that means that they are on a tight schedule. It means they've got to keep that clearance from the line to avoid, federal fines and a lot of really heavy hitting things that come with that, with those rights of way. Won't get too much into the weeds on that, but definitely the transmission lines, they get on a much more concrete schedule.
Okay, I do have a question for you, Jesse. I think this might be a little bit of a delayed question based off
Okay.
on your slides. Joe wants to know, does Georgia Power charge a fee for 811 services?
No, I don't think that we charge a fee just to utilize the service. The only fee that I know of is the fee that's associated with whatever must be done. So if the line has to be de-energized, or if you're asking for the line to be relocated, there's going to be a charge associated with that. But to actually just get the 811 process started, I've never heard of anyone having to pay a fee for that process.
Thank you, Jesse.
Yeah. So another one that we get frequently is, so my trees are not even touching the wires. So why do they have to prune them? So this kind of goes back to that proactive work versus reactive work. So ideally, we don't want to be trimming the trees if they're touching the lines. We want to have a little time before that. So what we're doing coming every 3 years is we are trying to get that clearance so that the trees never touch the line. That's the goal. The trees never touch the line. So if they're touching the line, that almost will turn into reactive work if it gets bad enough. So if they start touching the line, the trees start catching on fire, the limbs start burning back. You've got a whole host of issues that will come with that. So what we're doing by coming every 3 years is we're preventing that from happening. And because of that, you may see us get more clearance than you would think we need, but our rights of way on a distribution line are about 15 feet on either side of the line. And what that does for us is that gives us enough distance from that line to give that tree that 3 years. So we know that we're not coming back for 3 more years. We've got to get that distance from the line because those trees are going to be putting out a lot of growth, especially with our climate. Also, trees are dynamic. So, if you've ever stood or sat and watched a tree in the wind, it's swaying back and forth. So even if we, trim back a tree, if we don't get enough clearance on that tree and the wind blows it into the line, we're still having an issue, either an outage or a fire hazard or, one of those things, energized trees, something like that. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to prevent the trees from touching the wires. And, as someone, if you can kind of put yourself in someone's shoes that's not familiar with this, yeah, I mean, that's something I can say I would potentially say, like, well, why are they having to do this? They're not even touching. But you've got to kind of get yourself into the mindset of every 3 years. So I won't see these people again for 3 more years, most likely. So they've got to get that clearance from the line. Another one we get is my tree off balance now, since you only pruned one side of it? So something I like to talk to customers about specifically is that the roots are the stability. Now, I will, put in here, especially in the metro area, we have a lot of roots that are impacted by driveways and sidewalks and streets. So yes, I understand that we're not in a perfect area a lot of times where that tree has just got, unlimited space for its roots, but we are not pruning enough off of a tree to cause it to immediately fall over onto your house because of what we've pruned off of it. And in a lot of areas, we don't prune the whole side off of the tree. And even if we did, that's a proper pruning technique for utility line clearance. So that's what I like to, try to remind everyone is the stability of the tree is really in the roots. I mean, yes, it's got all of these, leaves and limbs and everything, but what we're doing is really not going to cause that huge imbalance at the top of the tree that's going to cause it to just topple over. Of course, trees are unpredictable, so I'll never say that, that tree will not fall over. I would never say that because we have no idea what trees do. Trees that you think are straight up and down will never fall, will fall tomorrow. So I don't, ever say anything concrete like that. What we're doing is just getting that clearance. The tree stability kind of falls within the root system. We also have a lot of people ask, well, since you trimmed that side, can you come over here into my yard and even it out on the other side of the tree? And that's actually against our policy. That's considered private work. So we will not get onto private property and start, trying to, landscape your trees or anything like that. Our purpose when we're coming through is to get that clearance from those energized power lines. It's not for aesthetics. We do prune to a standard, but it is not for aesthetics. We do our best to, try to leave things looking in a nice way, but it is going to change the shape of the tree. And if that customer desires to have the tree evened out on the other side, that's something that they have to do on their own. Do utilities have to ask permission before pruning my tree? So, obviously this can be a touchy subject, and it is, and it has been for a while, but easements provide the permission and the legal right for Georgia Power to go in and clear and keep clear the lines from all vegetation. So notification before the work is actually a courtesy. So specifically in Atlanta, if we're doing tree work on your property, a lot of times you'll receive a door card on your mailbox or on your front door. You may even speak to one of us that says, hey, just letting you know, we're going to be coming through in the next several weeks, and we are going to be pruning this tree on your property. We are not asking for your permission, but we are just telling you, hey, as a courtesy, we're not just going to show up and do this work. So removals, so if we're going to remove a tree, that's going to be handled a little bit differently in most cases. So in that case, we would actually, come up to you, probably discuss that with you, let you know, hey, you've got a hazardous tree, or hey, this tree really would be better removed because we're not able to properly prune it the way that we'd like. And then we'll go through that process with you. But pruning, we do have the right to keep those lines clear. And you as the customer want us to keep those lines clear. Yes, it's sometimes painful when we come through and we prune the trees, but you want those lines to be clear. You want reliable power. Your neighbors want reliable power. And that's what I just ask people to keep in mind whenever they do have questions about us coming on the property, or whenever they maybe don't love us coming out there. I just ask them to keep in mind, we're doing this really for you so that your power stays reliable.
Hey, yeah. Justin has a question. Where does Georgia Power draw the line between doing the work in-house and using a contractor?
So for tree work, so for our line clearance, we use all contracted labor. So I think that before we have used in-house tree crews, like several years ago, probably way before I was here, but we contract out all of our tree trimming, tree removals, any of our vegetation work is all contracted out. So we have a small group of arborists that kind of oversee that work, and then all of the work that is done in the field is actually done by contractors. So no in-house tree company or tree trimming done by us, Georgia Power.
Thank you, Jesse. Justin, let me know if we didn't get that answered enough for you.
And then I also attached just a little screenshot of what one of our easements looks like. So we have a lot of easements that are, very, very old. I mean, early 1900s, I've seen some. So these things last, they stand the test of time. And just, some of the verbiage in here that I just wanted to point out that you may see is, so, it talks about giving us the right at all times to enter upon said premises for purpose of inspecting said lines, making repairs, etc. Also the right to cut away or trim and keep clear of said lines all trees, limbs of trees, and other obstructions that may interfere or be likely to interfere with the proper operation of said lines. So that easement, that Georgia Power purchased however many years ago, that is kind of what gives us the ability to come in and do this maintenance. So what will my tree look like after it's pruned by the utility? So we've got a few different methods that we'll use. So you may see trees under the line that are V'd out or that are U'd out. So this is one method of pruning trees. This is actually the ideal method for pruning trees under the line. Topping is not a proper pruning practice, and we've gotten away from doing that. We really strive to not top trees. So you may see a lot of crepe myrtles or trees in the city that are V'd out like this, that are planted in these tree lines. Now I won't stand up here and say that we absolutely do no topping statewide. That's I won't say that because I don't know that for sure, but I know that we strive at least to not do any topping under the lines. So you may see this, which we would say is kind of L'd out. So, this tree is beside the line, and we, L out the sides, we trim off the back, and then we kind of leave the tree with a shelf underneath. So this is another ANSI standard proper way of pruning a tree. And then you may see trees side pruned. So in some of our bigger corridors, some of our more rural areas, you may see trees that get, kind of totally side pruned, which is also a proper way to prune trees. This picture is one of our helicopter trimming projects. So you can see he's got that large saw kind of hanging underneath the helicopter, and he's going through and side pruning those trees to kind of give it that walled off maximum clearance benefit. And like I said, this is not necessarily for aesthetic purposes. This maple tree here, obviously we changed the shape of this tree. We won't say that we don't change the shape, but we have to, and we are obligated to keep those lines clear from these trees. And this is a proper way to do that. Like I said, in a lot of areas, we really do try our best to, keep aesthetics in mind, in certain areas. And when we're doing this work, we really do try to work with our customers who are concerned with the aesthetics of it. But bottom line, we're not concerned with aesthetics, we're concerned with reliable power, and we're concerned with the safety of the public. So those are the two things that we kind of fall back on. So all in all, communication is key. So poor communication equals poor education. So answer the questions. That's what, I'll go back to what, John Harris said in the chat. We need more people talking about this. I'm very passionate about this, what I do for a living. I want people to understand why we do this. And I want people to understand what the impact of trees conflicting with power lines are, so that they understand why we do this. So answer questions that you get from the public. If you work in utility, or even if you are a private arborist or have your own company or whatever it is, and you get questions, now you know a little bit more about it, you can answer those. If you work in the utility industry, answer questions from your peers that they may have gotten. I ask my peers questions constantly, just trying to learn, hey, have you ever encountered this situation? Hey, what's the best way to communicate this? And then answer questions from other people in the green industry too. That's the only way that we're really going to get the right information out to people. And then finally, ask questions yourself. So obviously I'm not a perfect person. I didn't probably cover everything that everyone, has ever asked a question about. And I, may have missed some things, but that's why you ask questions, and y'all have asked some great questions in this presentation, and just continue to keep learning. I'm learning every day. I've been doing this for 5 years and I learn something new every day. So always be willing to ask questions. And part of the communication is, and part of our responsibility with the communication is to make sure that we are educating the public and that we're educating each other on, the who, what, when, where, and why of utility arboriculture. So, talking about responsibility, power lines and trees are always going to coexist in these spaces. They always are. If not, I guess I'll be out of the job, but they're always going to coexist. So what can be done? So utilities in particular should strive to assess trees for risks. So, what I was speaking on earlier, trees that are, not within our right of way, trees that are within the right of way. If it looks funny, just go look at it, go assess it, see, is this a hazard that I can prevent? And then prune with tree health and structure in mind. So, I'll say again, we're not doing this for aesthetics, but we're also not out here trying to destroy trees. So, we have a standard that we, must prune in line with. And, we've got to keep that in mind when we're overseeing this work that's done by these tree crews on our system. And then again, just educating people. And through that education, one of our best, pieces of, legislation, I guess, for lack of a better word, that we've put out is plant the right tree in the right place. So this is kind of a law that we go by and something that we communicate to our customers. If you plant the right tree in the right place, you're going to avoid a lot of headache yourself as the homeowner, because you won't see us. We won't need to come by and prune that tree. And also, you're eliminating that hazard from the power line. So you're going to be doing your community a service by helping prevent outages. We're going to have less to do when we come out there. We're going to, be able to focus in other areas that may have more vegetation that's more mature. And I realize that, 8 times out of 10, you move into a house, you didn't plant that tree. So you just kind of have to deal with the repercussions of moving into a house with a tree that's conflicting with the power lines. But if given the opportunity, I really, really encourage you as a homeowner, or you as someone who's communicating with a homeowner, to plant the right types of trees in the right places. And this is a great diagram, this tree pruning zone. So as I said earlier, Georgia Power's right of way is 15 feet on either side of the line. And then you kind of see the tree heights as you go. So we want nothing in that pole line, in that 15-foot right of way. We want nothing there, because if anything is there, it prevents our crews from being able to access that infrastructure in a time of an outage. And then it also is something that's, more than likely going to grow into the line at some point, something that we've got to continuously trim back. So as you get further away outside of that 15 feet, you can kind of see what you can start planting. So you've got your low zone, 25 feet or less. You've got the medium zone, 40 feet or less. You get closer to your house where you can plant your big trees if you'd like. So we really like this, documentation that we're able to share with the public. Just kind of gives you a good idea, a good diagram of where those trees can be located. And that is it. So, did not take the full time, but I did want to just kind of give you guys an overview. Like I said, I know there's probably some stuff that I missed, but just, good general information on utility arboriculture. And here's my contact info, and then I will field any questions that may have come in.
Yeah, I had a couple I was saving for you. Thank you. I learned a lot as well. So this has been fantastic. I will start with, Justin had another question for you.
Yeah.
Do you do tree mapping, inventories per se?
We do not. So we do not do any inventory. We don't do any mapping at this time. We have started utilizing more technology in trying to help us to identify hazards. So while it's not taking an inventory and it's not mapping, we do utilize LiDAR to kind of help us identify trees that are hazardous on the right of way, or trees that are really close to the lines, and kind of utilizing that to prioritize areas that have heavier tree canopy. So like I said, not really inventory, not really mapping, but it is something that we're utilizing to try to target areas that do have a larger, canopy overall.
Awesome. Thank you. If anybody has any follow-up questions to that, let me know. Tim wants to know, what is the criteria for Georgia Power to remove a dead tree that is 50-50 over lines and homes?
So that's going to really kind of depend on several different factors. So it is going to depend on the distance from the line. It's going to depend on where that tree is located, on whether it's prioritized highly or not. So, a lot of times you'll report it, the arborist will come out and look at it. If it is outside of 10 feet, more than likely we're going to say, hey, this one's good for private removal. It's not something that we feel like needs to be removed at this time, but we will put it on a list so that when we come back through for our routine maintenance, so when we send our crews through to do our routine pruning every 3 years, we will reassess that tree, and it may be something that we remove at that time. But it just depends, if it's a nasty dead tree, it's right on the borderline of private property and right of way, it's got, big, decay in it, or it's leaning weird, something like that, that's probably something that we'll look a little harder at removing, especially if it's going to impact a lot of customers. If it comes over onto the line, that is something that we'll prioritize, but really it's case by case. And I know that that's, not a great answer, not what people want to hear, but it's really going to take that personal evaluation by the arborist that oversees the area that you're in. And a lot of those factors, like I said, location of the tree, how many customers are impacted by it, can it be removed privately? When are we coming back through to do our routine maintenance? Those are some things that we consider when we come through.
Awesome. Thank you. Let's see what we got. Anybody else have any questions or follow up on that while we're waiting on people to come through with any last questions in the last few minutes? We have, just so you know, I have dropped the CEU sign-in sheet and evaluation in the chat. I see some already coming across. So click that link. You'll fill out an evaluation. Once you fill out that evaluation, don't close the window. It will automatically redirect you to your CEU sign-in sheet so that you get your credits. And then I have more of a comment than a question. Joe just said one of the greatest benefits of advanced notification is that it invites customers to come out of the woodwork to ask questions and express concerns. It gives utility an opportunity to have the right conversation.
Yes, agreed, 100%. That is one of the greatest things about notification. And I think one of the, and I won't get off on this tangent too much, but I think one of the greatest things that we can do is to create that good foundation relationship between a customer and the utility, because in my experience, if a customer has a negative experience with us, they will never forget that. And in creating that good experience from the get-go, yes, it does invite the customer to kind of ask you questions maybe that you weren't ready for. But at the same time, if you've notified someone and you take the time to talk to them, you're really establishing a positive connection between the utility and the customer, which really makes our job easier, when we're actually having to do the work on someone's property.